And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up listening to The Burning God. This is the third book in the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang, and I wanted to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just now. So I gotta give this book a 1-star rating, and it was really easy to do because I just liked so much about this book. I hated this book. Hate to say it. I really love to love books, but I kind of knew this would happen because of the trend that the series was going. I liked the first book. I just liked the second one, and this just kept on the downward spiral, and I just ultimately left wondering, like, what am I missing? What did other people see in this book that is so beloved by so many people? This book won many awards. I constantly hear that this book is just wonderful, that it'll break you, that it'll put you to tears. And the only tears that I ended up shedding were the boredom of trying to get through this book so I can get on to my next read. So I want to go through and explain the different parts of the book in an unspoilery way and talk about why I disliked them. And there is one part that I did like, and I want to highlight that as well. So the first thing I always talk about is the story. I complained about this in the second book, but this just continued down this path. And this book does this strange writing of the line between like a fantasy book, which is what this is billed to be, and a historical fiction. And the reason for this is the crux of this story is a story that's been told. It's the story of the Chinese Civil War. It's the story of the Opium Wars in China. And there's so many parallels to the Chinese story that this almost feels like a ripoff. You know, I hesitate to say that it's a ripoff because I think it was so intentional that that's the goal. But it just felt uninspiring. You know, and I wish that it really picked one or the other. You know, I would have preferred this book to go heavy into the fantasy elements, make a more unique story that had Chinese influences, because I don't mind Chinese influences in a book. I just started Jade City today, which clearly has a lot of Chinese influences. In the little that I've read so far, I love it. Maybe my opinion will change as I get into it, but that's a unique story. But this was not. I also felt like if the author just wanted to tell a historical fiction about these stories, that it would have been much better as well. And ultimately, I think that there have been much better books that told this story, but didn't go down this weird path. You know, real history is a lot more brutal than this book. And so that's one of the things that I'm really confused about why so many people loved this. Because they talk about how this story just like broke them and they were in tears and all these like hugely emotional things that I didn't get impacted by. And it's like, why? And I ultimately come to two major reasons. One is that I'm just missing it, that the problem is me, and it very well could be. I don't bill myself as being some genius. I'm an average guy that just likes fantasy books, so maybe I'm the problem. The other reason that I could see is maybe the people that love this book are not used to reading war books. I happen to be. Before I got into fantasy, I religiously read war stories and war novels and biographies and historical fictions, and that was my jam. And this was not as good as those stories, and not nearly as brutal or harsh or sad as some of these other real-life stories, because nothing is more brutal than real history. And I know like a lot of people that haven't read a lot of history have a hard time believing that. Like clearly you could make up things that are harsher than real life. You can't. Real life is very brutal, and the history will show that. And I felt like this read like a war story for a YA audience. And clearly a more adult side of the YA, I would not recommend that a young adult read this. Unless you were more into the adult than the young, because there is very bad things that happen in this book, but not nearly as much as the true story of what happened in the Chinese Civil War, which was a horrific event. And so at the end of the day, I think you would be better off as a reader if you did one of two routes. If you wanted to read about this, go read a biography of Mao, which is what the main character essentially is. It's not directly Mao, there's some differences, but that's clearly who this book was trying to talk about. Or go the other route and go read a fantasy war book like The Black Company, a book that I love that tells a unique story that weighs heavy into the fantasy elements, and I think it ultimately is a better book. So that's the story problem I had. Let's go to the world building. The world building was severely lacking. Why? Because it lacked complete inspiration. It's just China. There was no creation that happened here. Look at a map. It looks like a zoomed in China. Look at the countries that are existing here. It's Taiwan. It's Japan. It's China. There's nothing unique here. Look at the main characters. You've clearly have Chiang Kai-shek. You clearly have Mao. It's just, where's the inspiration? And it really hurt for me as a reader who understood about these events. It just lacked so much originality that it hurt, and it made the world building feel non-existent to me. So let's move on to the one element of the book that I did like, and that is the fantasy elements. I did enjoy this, and it's the only really unique part of the story and I don't want to ruin anything, but it's that the gods are accessed through using drugs. That's not a concept I'd ever read about, not even close, and it's quite enjoyable. Now, that doesn't carry on the other tremendously bad parts of this book for me, but I did enjoy that aspect, and every time the gods were involved, it's the one time that I really did enjoy my reading in this book. Moving on to the characters, and this is probably the harshest thing I have to say about the book. This is a single POV book that follows the main character of Rin, and ultimately, I hate Rin. If you're going to tell a single POV story, I can't hate you as a character. It ruins the enjoyability of this book. And so I think two different things could have happened. The author could have wrote Rin in a different way that actually showed some character growth in a positive way. That have some more depth to this character, that showed not the extreme repetition that occurred in this book. There's only so much that I can read about a character succeeding, getting betrayed through their own ineptitude, battling with wanting to be compassionate, but ultimately going the bloodlust route, and then getting victory and betrayal and compassion bloodlust again. It's completely repetitive and gets quite boring rather quickly. I think it also would have been better that if they would have utilized multiple POVs. There's some major characters in this book that were begging for point of views that would have let me attach to these characters more. I would have maybe been able to see Rin from an outside perspective. I would have understood their motivations more. But like Katay, I think, and Najah, I needed to learn more about these characters. Their development felt too rushed, and I didn't end up feeling them as characters, and it was harsh. I felt like Rin could have been a more compelling character if she had this kind of like descent into madness. But ultimately, she just ended up being dislikable and insecure, and I just didn't like anything about that character. Now, I did enjoy her in the first book. In the first book, I thought she went through some immense character growth. She went from and I don't want to spoil anything, so I guess I won't say too much more, but a very tragic thing happens to her towards the end of this book, and she has to deal with these events. And it was a unique take on war that I hadn't read before in a fantasy book, and I was liking that, but it just got way too repetitive, and I did not enjoy that further on. So let's move on to the writing style. I felt like the writing style was majorly problematic because it did come off like a war story, and war stories don't have any prose. They're straight to the point. And this is a novel that would have benefited by some greater writing skill, and it felt very basic. And I'm going to give you some examples that I've written down here. What I've written down here is the most famous quotes from this book. And if you go to Goodreads, I always find that you can get a really good snapshot into a writing style and writing quality by looking at the most popular quotes from these books. So I'm going to read you a few of them real quick, and you're going to get a look at what I'm talking about when I come to the basicness of the writing style here. Quote 1, ruin me, ruin us, and I'll let you. Okay. Quote number 2, take what you want, I'll hate you for it, but I'll love you forever. I can't help but love you. All right, let's go to the last example. You can't do this for me, he said. I won't let you. It's not for you. It's not a favor. It's the cruelest thing I could do. This reads like YA. It's not, and nothing against YA. I mean, I guess a little bit against YA, because it's coming off like an adult story, and the writing is very basic. Just for fun, I want to show you this juxtaposition against what I find to be good prose. And, this is The Burning God. And I decided to pull the top quote that I could find on Goodreads from The Crippled God, one of my favorite book by Stephen Erickson, who I think is one of the masters of beautiful prose. And the top quote is this: "And now the page before us blurs. An age is done. The book must close. We are abandoned to history. Raise high one more time the tattered standard of the fallen. See through the drifting smoke to the dark stains upon the fabric. This is the blood of our lives. This is the payment of our deeds, all soon to be forgotten. We were never what people could be. We were only what we were." Okay, I hope you get a sense of what I'm talking about here, but it was painful to read this book because of what it lacked in the writing quality and all the other things that I said. So the final thing that I judge a book on is the overall enjoyment. And that's really what drives my score. And my enjoyment was a 1. It was the bottom tier. I hated my experience. The best thing I could say about this book is that it's over. I get to read another book now. Thank goodness. So if you love this book, more power to you. I wish I was in your boat. I won't try to pretend like I'm right. Books are completely subjective. You may love something that I hate. You may hate something that I love. This just didn't work for me. I hope it worked for you. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.